I'd like to begin just by acknowledging the traditional owners of the lands on which we virtually meet and pay my respects to the elders past, present and emerging. I'm speaking to you from Jabberguy country, which is in the tablelands above Cairns, and the rest of our panellists are all from the Cairns region. While I am speaking with you, I just wanted to give a quick plug to something that the Cairns Council, Sophie and I developed some time ago called the Cool Homes Guide. And you may find this a useful resource. So I've put a link in there in the chat in case you want to take a look at it. All right, so first of all, I'm going to introduce Simon Thompson, who's a passionate sustainable house owner and renovator, talking about his nearly off-grid powerhouse.
Oh, good day everybody. We started off when he first moved to Cairns living in a house down in Menunda, and we made that house into something really sustainable and very, very efficient. We opened up the house day down there for Sustainable House Day. We then moved up slope a little bit to avoid climate change a bit, I suppose. But we had a bit of a checklist once we bought this place because it had a fairly high power bill, the first one we saw. So we decided we'd go through our checklist that we'd learnt from the 7 years of living in the tropics. And so first of all, we started with trying to reflect all of the heat as best we can. So we needed to put in a new roof anyway. So we decided to put in a white ColourBond roof. So that allowed us to keep most of the heat off, as well as keeping, we had a bit of reflective foil as well underneath that. That made it so that we didn't have too much heat coming through. We then wanted to make sure we had plenty of airflow, so we put security screens on so that we could leave the place open all day, every day, and that's been great. Keeps everything from getting mouldy, and yeah, keeps it from getting too hot either. As we were putting the roof on, and before the roof was completed, we started putting solar power on and solar hot water. So they were the next big sort of issues to try and reduce our bills into the future, I guess. And then over time, we've tried to get the most efficient appliances that we could get. And in 2017, just before Christmas, we finally got our Tesla Powerwall 2 battery. And since then, we've basically been off grid. We're on the grid, but we only export. We have very, very minimal input from the grid, and which is great. We've also gone into electric transport. We unfortunately can't afford to get our desired electric car, but well, one day we'll save up and be able to do that. But at the moment, we've got electric bicycles. So my wife and I have both got electric bikes, much to the envy of my kids. I've got a full suspension electric bike, which is great. And we've started doing homegrown food in greenhouse and also through microgreens, as you can see in the photos. Anyway, that's me.
Thanks a lot for that, Simon. And now I'd like to introduce Sophie Barrett, who's also from the Cairns Regional Council, and talking about her. She's also a building designer, and she wants to talk about is going to talk about her house that she designed and built, called Dreamcatcher.
Thanks, Daniel. So yes, as Daniel mentioned, I work in sustainability with him, but I've also worked for 20 years in the tropics as a designer. So really important for me with my own home to make sure I incorporated as many of these kind of features as possible in the home. So Daniel mentioned the Cool Homes Guide earlier. We've got a bit of a checklist in there, and if you have a look at that checklist, these are some of the features you can look at to see what you can incorporate in your own home. So so we also opened the home in 2017 and had about 150 people through. So some of the features that we also included were open plan design. So passive design was really important, looking at the orientation. We were lucky enough to be starting from scratch with a vacant block, so we could actually get the right orientation for the sun and breezes from the southeast as well. My husband has a business called Green at Heart that looks at energy efficiency ratings for homes. So we wanted to get as high a star rating as possible. And this home's 9.5 star energy rating. And there's just a few small things that you can do to get that star rating up, like things like using 1400 fans instead of 1200 fans, or venting your roof space. Things like putting insulation up under the ceiling and on top of the ceiling and getting that extra insulation in. We've also incorporated some recycled materials into the house. So under the slabs, we have some crushed recycled glass, which is a waste product from the council. Some of the broken glasses from the material recovery facility that is usually just thrown out, but the council's using it under footpaths and roads, and we tried using it under our slabs and also in the polished concrete floors, and also some light features at the entry. So we've also used recycled timbers. You can see on that little picture in the top left in the entry area from a bridge from Machen's Beach, and we've used those on the pergolas outside and the fire pit as well. So outside we've looked at things like low water use, so we've used native planting. You can see the grass there, that's a Zoysia matrella grass, which is a native grass. It's called no-mow grass, and we actually, it doesn't require no mowing, but it's probably every about 3 months that we mow it. So it keeps the water use down and also allows us to retain that water on site. We have got rainwater tanks and composting as well. So yeah, really pleased to be here today and happy to answer any of your questions later on. Thanks.
Thanks a lot, Sophie. That's great. And next we have Beau Moriarty from My Build, who will be talking about the tiny house that he's designed and built, but as Beau says, there's nothing small about it, right? Thanks, Beau.
Hey, how's it going? Yeah, so we are just a building company in Cairns. We've been running for a couple of years now, and kind of always had a thing. We've been trying to aim down the sustainable building. And we built the tiny home. Start of the year, we started it for a client, and just kind of built it to what, as yeah, she wanted a tiny home, and yeah, we designed it obviously to be sustainable. And so
Beau, you're muted. There you go.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, so it's only a starting thing for us. We want to kind of keep going down this path with building sustainable tiny homes. You know, they use a lot less, about a fifth of the resources to build, and to keep running, they're take about a fifth of the power and resources to keep running. We aim to keep building tiny homes that have fully self-sustained with solar and batteries. But that's obviously, we need to find the right clients to build for. This particular tiny home is built at high ceilings and a loft bed, so you got a lot of airflow through the place. It is small, but it's still got there's nothing small about it, like he says. There's a full-size kitchen, bathroom, lounge room, and a little patio. There's, yeah, for all the it's lightweight construction with a fully insulated walls and ceilings. It is still just a start, and there's a lot more we can do to make it more sustainable, but yeah, it's definitely something we're interested in. It's been good to be part of Sustainable Housing Day and get it out there, and hopefully we can get more people interested in building tiny homes in the future. So I'll go back to you. Sorry, I'll leave.
Hey, thanks for that, Beau. Cheers. And finally, we have Tony Lawson from Lawson Design, who's a building designer in Cairns.
Thanks, Daniel. Can you hear me?
Yeah, that's good.
Good. Look, this is a house that was designed and built nearly 12 years ago now. And it was designed to cater for a number of uses, either bedrooms or rentable spaces, B&B, guests. And we decided that the pavilion style was the obvious way around it. And so we came up with 4 pavilions, 2 bedrooms, 1 living pod, and a utility area. The utility area has also a cyclone bunker built into it, which is pretty important up here. It's extremely tropical climate, not as bad as Darwin, but still very hot in the summer. So the challenge was to design this house that met all the requirements, suited to the landscape, was to be as sustainable as possible and didn't need to be air conditioned, which is a difficult thing to achieve in the middle of a summer in Cairns. Now we were lucky with the site because we had basically a northerly aspect, and it looked into the creek and the rainforest. So we fanned out all the various pavilions, and they all achieved a view and privacy. The predominant material was timber, and all of that was sourced locally, which I thought, well, we all thought was very important. In essence, this was a design. It was an exercise in passive solar design to try and utilise the natural elements to their greatest effect, and this is what we came up with. So I hope you like it. Thank you, Daniel.
That's great, Tony. Thanks so much. So now we're just going to move into the panel discussion, and we've had some questions come through in the question and answer already. So one of the questions is around engaging architects. This is a question I personally have too. So when engaging architects, how much in the way of plans or advice do you get prior to accepting their brief and paying anything? And I'd like to add something else to that. How important do you think it is to engage a specialist building designer or architect when you're planning a house in this region? So I'll put that to Sophie or Tony, seeing as you're building designers.
Okay, well, to start with, there's a number of people that can help you with that. Architects are one, building designers are the other, and there are people that specialise in certain areas. I think the biggest thing with designing something a little different, and especially if you want to design something for tropical living that's not air conditioned, you need to look around to find people who are suited to this. I don't think everybody is suited to certain aspects of this specialised area. What do you think, Sophie?
Yeah, I'd agree. It is pretty important to get that specialist advice up front, because it can save you a lot of money in terms of your energy bills and the comfort of your home later on. If you don't sort of invest in that at the start, it can mean that you might end up with a home that is hot and costs you a lot more to run. In terms of that other part of it, in terms of how much you would see prior to accepting the brief and paying the fees, I think most people seem to offer a site meeting and probably an initial chat with the client before engaging them for a design. Is that your experience, Tony? You'd agree with that?
Yeah, I think so. I don't see it. I don't think it's possible to design a house, a well-designed house, without spending time on the site. The site that we had was pretty special. I mean, it wasn't in suburbia. It's on the edge of the rainforest with its own creek. It's a pretty special area, but you really need to spend a bit of time on a place to understand the orientation, the natural elements, where the views are. We were lucky where we had everything lined up. We had orientation, views, etc. But if you have a difficult site where the house is, say, facing west, you really need to put some thought into this. It's not something that you can just grab a plan off the shelf and mirror reverse it, which is what a lot of builders do, which I don't think is a good approach at all. Thank you.
So can I just ask then, do you think that going through the process to properly design a house for the tropics, and then the build that follows that is likely to lead to a more expensive option versus just buying something off the plan like a project home? Or is it possible to actually save money through better design, which means that your overall cost will be less?
Well, okay. I think you've got to really ask yourself, what are you designing a house for yourself or for resale? I think a lot of mistakes are made when people design a house for resale thinking that everybody wants a 4-bedroom house. So to answer that roughly, you can build a small house and still have, it can still be effective and cost a hell of a lot less.
Yeah, I think some of the
Brian-
builders.
Oh,
Oh,
sorry.
sorry. I was just adding to that. A lot of the builders do engage architects or building designers as part of their staff. So you really need to shop around. I mean, a lot of builders are saying they offer free plans. That is actually factored into their costs, so they've kind of allowed for those plans. But I think that getting that professional advice, whether it's a builder who has someone on staff who is really aware of environmental design, can really save you money in the long run, and you can actually incorporate a lot of these features into any affordable home. Sort of the basic things like open plan design, ventilation, orientation, all of those things don't cost you anymore and can be incorporated into any house.
So I'm just thinking, if you look at the typical Queenslander, a lot of the older building stock, it was all designed to be passively cooled, and maybe that's a trend that sort of wasn't followed in the last 20 years. But do you think that houses, typical houses now are being designed with more of these features as a standard feature, or is it something that really the customer has to ask for them and really think about it?
Well,
Sophie or Tony?
That's a pretty broad question. There are builders out there who specialise in tropical homes, but there's a hell of a lot out there who don't, and I see that as the sad thing that's happening in the suburbs today, and it probably starts with a bad subdivision followed by a bad design. And then everybody's living in a little air-conditioned cubicle for the rest of their life. That's the initial problem that I see. What do you reckon, Sophie?
Yeah, I think the builders actually have got a lot better in responding to the tropical design. But again, with project homes, a lot of it is about trying to keep the home as cheap as possible and keep the costs down. And often they will sacrifice things, which probably don't cost a lot more, but each of those little things can add cost on, like a 900 overhang compared to a 600 overhang, or just the minimal insulation rather than, going the extra insulation and venting the roof space and things like that too. But if you get a good builder and you make sure that you have a look at the plans that they have, and we mentioned the Cool Homes Guide before, there's a checklist on there, and you can even take that to your builder and say, have you incorporated this, this and this, and work with the builder. I mean, there's some great builders out there. I don't know if Beau wants to respond from a builder's perspective in terms of all of this.
Thanks, Sophie. Yeah, like I find it a lot. There's not a lot of builders that do actually take a lot of time to think about the orientation and a lot of other cool features. Look, it does cost more to build, a little bit more to build houses sustainably. Like, it can be done for a similar cost, but I guess a lot of people, it's a hard decision to make, to put out like an extra cost in the build. And like what you try to say to people, it does pay off over time with the energy, like especially insulation. Like, I find a lot of homes that I renovate don't even have insulation in the ceiling at all. And it's not a big expense to put the insulation in to start with. And the cooling, you pay it off tenfold in the next 20 years of having a house. And a lot of project builders just, they cut corners where they can, I guess. And
Could I just add something to that? I think a lot of the problem comes from building very big houses too. I mean, if cost is what you want to cut down, then I would just cut down on the physical size of a house. The house that was shown earlier on, it doesn't have a classic veranda, for example. We decided to build smaller smaller buildings, but open them up with an option of openings, i.e. doors and or screens, which means you turn the house into the veranda. So straight away there's a saving, and yes, you may pay a little bit more for those flexible perimeters, but at the end of the day, when you live in Cairns and you've got a nice block of land, you don't want to be back in the bowels of a house looking through 5 meters of veranda with furniture on it to see the outside. So I think the answer to it is to build a smaller house, actually.
Yes, I definitely agree with you there. It's yeah, like most of the houses now are well over 300 square meters and above, and it's really not necessary. I find it's not really necessary, and a lot of unused space. Like the tiny home that we built, you know, it's only, you know, 36 square meter footprint, and it is a little bit above the square meter rate of a cheap home or project home, but it is a lot more sustainable. It's going to be a lot cheaper to run.
Hey, thanks very much for that. Now I just want to answer one of the questions from the Q&A, and that was a question about, is there a separate energy rating system for tropical versus southern homes, given the different heating and cooling requirements? Sophie, I thought maybe you might be the best person to talk to that.
Yeah, thanks, Daniel. There is a national energy rating scheme, so there's various zones under that. So we do have a different zone up here, so it does use different calculation methodologies in our zone, which is zone 1. But a lot of the features will apply across a lot of the different zones. We're really lucky in Cairns that we only really have to think about keeping the home cool. In down south, it's actually a lot harder because you have to keep the home cool in summer and then warm in winter. So you're kind of trying to do 2 opposite things in the one house. So we're very fortunate here that it's a lot easier for us to do that. However, some of the principles that insulation and all of those different orientation, ventilation, all those things can apply across all zones.
Can you hear me there? Great. Sorry. Can you just talk to what do you think are the most important design principles that should be applied for building a cool home in the tropics? And I thought maybe you or Tony could talk to that.
Well, I'll jump in. The most important features, depends whether you want to live in air conditioning or not. And I'll talk about the one that is on the Sustainable House program now. It didn't have air conditioning. So when you're in the tropics, you've obviously got to keep the heat out. So the roof is the first place to start. But what actually keeps you cool in summer in the tropics is air moving across your body. So that can be answered by ceiling fans, but I think you've got to take it to the next level too. You could argue that a ceiling fan is only pushing hot air back down on the body. So I think you've got to be able to have something up high to let the hot air out. And then sometimes creating an air flow, like if in summertime when the air is quite still, it still comes from somewhere. So you've got to actually add to what Mother Nature's throwing at you. So you can actually pull air in at ground level with say a pedestal fan, and maybe put your ceiling fan on reverse and suck it out so that it goes out through a higher venturi opening and actually create an air path, which is sort of the opposite to sort of somebody saying, well, let's just turn a ceiling fan on. But you've got to work with what you've got too. Some blocks are really hot, others have good airflow.
Tony, just that ties into a question that's been asked in the chat, which is, you know, is there actually a conflict between the 2 ideas about how to cool a tropical home using a closed space, which is well insulated and air conditioned, and hopefully powered by solar, versus the passive design? And I guess I'm also thinking about when we have these really extreme hot days, like we have had, we've had 40+ degree days now in Cairns. Is it really going to be comfortable to live in a house that is completely naturally ventilated versus do we actually have to design in some active air conditioning? What do you think?
Well, sometimes you just have to turn an air conditioner on. We tend to turn ours on. Last summer, it might have been on for 2 weeks of the year, but other people just adamantly don't want air conditioning. So that's when you just got to work with creating your own airflows. But going back to the insulation thing, look, you've got to keep the heat out. So you've got to insulate your roof. That's first up. You've got to keep the any mass in the house. You've got to keep the sun off it. I think lightweight building materials are good because as soon as the sun drops off those building materials, the house cools down naturally. So you still have to insulate an open home. I think that this is where the planning and the orientation come into play. You just work with the orientation, so you don't obviously put something on the western side, like a garage or something would be a good thing to put on the western side rather than your living space. I don't know if that helps with that.
No, that's great. Thanks. Oh, hey, Simon, I was going to throw to you, and I've got a question for you. Just that ties into this. Given that you've retrofitted a house and you've taken these steps to make the best you can with a white roof and what have you, can you talk to how well what you've done has been able to avoid the need for active air conditioning?
Well, we do have air conditioners, so we've got air conditioners in each room, but we generally only use one when it's really hot. But what we've tended to do is to set the air conditioner quite warm, because the big killer on those really hot nights is the high humidity. So the heat, if you're not having to try and keep the heat out, you're just trying to keep the humidity out, and you can basically have the air conditioning taking the humidity out. We just have a fan on, and then the fan cools you because it's dry air, and you can have it set at 28 degrees, and it basically uses almost no power. It turns on once every, I don't know, half an hour or so, just to tweak it a little bit, and you basically end up not having to worry about the churning out heat and making a room into a fridge, and having that big problem of heat coming through or cold air getting out. So the insulation is not such an issue, because we've got louvers on all of our windows down the bottom. So it means that if we do put the air conditioner on, all the cold air roars out through those louvers. I mean, we can close them up, but they don't seal particularly well. But if you've got the temperature set at a reasonably high amount, the humidity doesn't seem to come through as much as the heat would, and it means that we can be quite effectively cool. But it's only, like as I say, we only use the air conditioner maybe, I don't know, this year we used it maybe 4 times, and this year was the first year that we actually used it all night a couple of times, because it was 43 degrees or over 40 degrees during the day, and it just meant that the night times never got below 30 degrees really, so it was pretty intense. But yeah, by doing what we did, and it's allowing us to use air conditioning less, and yeah, we feel very comfortable doing that. It's good.
Right. Thanks, Simon. And also, I believe that the white roof made a really big difference, and you actually have really experienced that. And can you just talk to that quickly?
Okay, yeah, so in my last house, we had a silver roof, and it didn't need to be replaced. So the cheapest way that I could think of was using physics and making it go white. So I bought the cheapest white paint that I could find in Bunnings, and I painted half the roof with white paint. And before I painted the silver stuff, I could jump onto the roof with my bare feet on the silver paint and go ow, ooh, ow, 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 ow in the middle of the day, and then step over to the white roof, and I could sit there and quite happily, not move at all. And it was at least 30 degrees cooler. So it just cut out all of the heat within the living space, the airspace underneath the roof. So insulation, I'd already insulated the house, and it had cooked me when I tried to put the insulation in, even doing it at night. And then after I'd put the white paint on, I could get into the the airspace under the roof and work as much as I wanted under there without getting hot at all. It was quite comfortable. And that's an essential way of trying to keep out and heat out in the tropics. Really good.
Yeah, that's brilliant to hear, and also to hear that you didn't use a specific heat reflective paint, but just a white paint of any sort.
Cost me $50.
Or a light. Yeah, great. Or on your new house, I believe you just used a light colour bond, so you don't have to get any very specific product. Yeah, that's awesome. Hey, we've had a question regarding the requirements for the MyBuild tiny house. So given that the MyBuild home is a secondary dwelling, would the council's planning regulations allow for buildings of a similar tiny home, would allow the building of a similar tiny home on foundations as a standalone house? And Sophie, do you think you're probably better across this than I am to talk about it?
Yeah, and I'm not sure. I think I'm not sure. We'd be good to throw to Beau afterwards as well, just to see what applications he made with the tiny house that was on the property, because they already had an existing home. But where you have an existing house on the site, you can actually apply for that as a granny flat, or you can do a dual occupancy. So at the moment, they're the kind of main methods of getting a tiny house in, or otherwise, if it's the only house on the site, you can just put it in as a normal standard house. But there are other things, like when they're on wheels, that's the grey area, because if it's a temporary house only and it's only for a few months, you can apply for that under a local law where you don't have to meet any of the cyclone or energy efficiency requirements, and it's more like a caravan and it's a temporary use. But if you want to live in it permanently, you do have to put in a building application, and you do have to comply with all of your energy efficiency and cyclone ratings. But there are ways to do it. We have a fact sheet as well, which we can find a link for and put it on our site too, about tiny houses and some of the planning stuff. But that's an area that's changing, because the tiny houses are a bit of a disruption to the standard housing model. They're affordable, more people are looking for them. They're trying to say, well, how can we put one of these in the backyard and rent it out and things like that? And those things are sort of slowly changing, and people are starting to push those boundaries. So it is an interesting space, but I'll hand you to Beau, who might want to add something to that.
Thanks, Sophie. Yeah, so the tiny home we built in Edge Hill was built as a granny flat, and you still have to go through all the general building approvals as if you were doing a renovation. You can only, obviously, it's more of like part of your house. You can't rent it out separately. Potentially, to rent it out like that, you've got to separately, or you've got to get a dual occupancy, or you can subdivide. At the moment, the actual council are doing in Cairns anyway, I don't know how far it is, but waiving certain dual occupants fees and that, which is benefiting, obviously. Hopefully people can start putting granny flats or tiny homes a bit more. But yeah, there is obviously quite a lot of fees normally involved in subdividing and dual occupancy. So it does, obviously, it makes it a bit harder. That's why a lot of people just use it as like a intergenerational living in that, and more of a granny flat situation.
Hey, Beau, I guess something else that we talked about is the benefits of a tiny house as an intermediate step. But potentially if somebody's bought a property and they can't afford to build their dream home, they might buy a tiny house as while they still don't have kids, probably, and then build their family home. Do you see that as a market for you?
Yes, well, it's something, we've looked into a few different areas where this could be possible. Yeah, like you say, in potentially you could start off by, if you buy a block of land and can't afford to straight away build a house, you could put a tiny home on it. Whether you actually get it connected to the services straight away, and then you can live in it for indefinitely until you can kind of move on to the step of building a house. It kind of saves you having to rent a separate property while you kind of get going through that process.
Hey, thanks for that. There's just going to turn to a question in the question answer. So do you think that the Australian standards are pushing us into air-conditioned spaces? Or can you have open homes that meet the standards? Maybe Tony or Sophie, you talk to that?
I'm not sorry, I didn't quite catch the question, Daniel.
It's just, I guess the point has been made, or the question has been asked, do the Australian standards push us into air-conditioned spaces in order to meet the NCC requirements, or is there any, can open homes meet all standards?
Well, I've designed tropical homes before where I've had basically very few walls in it, and even decking for the floor, and it struggles to meet a 6-star rating. So I guess, yes, they are pushing us in a direction. But I'll throw this one back to Sophie. I think tropical homes, true tropical homes, struggle with the energy efficiency ratings at the moment. And even though you design a house that it doesn't even have an air conditioner, you would think not getting much more sustainable than that, it still struggles to get a high star rating. Sophie, what do you think?
Yeah, well, the way the energy efficiency software works is that firstly, it's trying to look at the human comfort, and it does consider that the home will be closed up and air conditioned and keeping that comfort level. And then it gets to a certain point where that doesn't work, it then looks at natural ventilation. So it's looking at two different things, natural ventilation versus air conditioning. I mean, you can look at homes that can do both. So things like putting insulation on your ceiling obviously keeps the air conditioning working well. But then when it's under the roof, it's better for natural cooling. So with our place, for example, we put insulation under the roof and on the ceiling and vented the roof space so that if we do happen to use air conditioning, it works efficiently. We also zoned areas, so you can actually use air conditioning in certain areas and just close the door and just air condition that area rather than air conditioning the whole house, because when you're designing a home to be naturally ventilated, you have it all open and you don't block breeze paths, but then your air conditioning and with the louvers that Simon talked about, some of those things aren't as efficient. So it's thinking about how you can make the best of both of those things. But yeah, I think it still has a way to go in terms of the methodology. It's definitely, it is assuming that a lot of people will use air conditioning.
Just a query, I guess, for anybody who wants to talk to it. Also, I have is if you are going to design a passively designed house to allow maximum ventilation, then do you find there's also issues with noise coming through the house? Because I wonder how many people actually like the idea of a block house so they can just lock themselves away from their neighbours and their dogs.
Sophie?
So, maybe you can talk to that.
I'll throw that to
or
Sophie.
Either, any of you.
Yeah, Simon, well, you live in a home with louvers. How do you find that?
Well, up until a couple of years ago, we were really, really happy with the open windows, but we've had dogs turn up nearby, and so that makes it a little bit more disturbing. But and that's just a general thing that you get, I suppose, in living in the community. But we live on a quiet street. The worst we really put up with, I suppose, is the scrub hens up in the hill, and I can sleep through most of those. So yeah, no.
I think that the smaller the blocks are getting, the more people do interact with each other, and the tiny homes, I guess, have that issue as well. If you start making smaller homes on smaller blocks, there'll be more neighbours and more noise and things like that to deal with. But yes, it's how it's moving towards that increased density. You've got to be a bit more considerate of each other.
I just chip in there. You really hit a nail on the head there, Sophie. With the smaller blocks, I really see it as a negative. I mean, basically, you have a small site, and then you have a project builder mentality of squeezing a 4-bedroom house onto a small site. They are almost wall to wall, and then everybody air conditions their house because it's a free package, or so you think. And so everybody's motor and condenser unit is about 300 mil away from your open louvers. So the first thing you're going to do is shut your house down. So it's a problem that just propagates itself, starting back at who allowed this stupid subdivision to occur.
Thanks very much, Tony. Yeah, I'll just say that is something that we do discuss quite a lot with our planning team at council. So we're certainly trying to improve the way, developments are set out. But unfortunately, that's all we have time for today. So I'd just like to thank all of you for joining this discussion and being part of it all. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Daniel.